Okay, so this is the second half of the Scott Peterson Amber Fry dating timeline. I'm jumping in the middle, so if you didn't watch the last video, you might want to go back and watch that one first. So we are now at December 11th. So this will be the third date between Scott and Amber. And this is he goes with her to a party, and this is Sean's fiance. So Scott, Amber, and her daughter Ayana all go to the party together. And what happens is Scott arrives at the house. He helps around the house a little bit. He gets dressed there. Ayana had an accident. She'd had to have stitches. So Scott is changing her bandages while Amber's getting ready to. There's also a time where they also go to a tuxedo shop. So Scott can get fitted for a tuxedo for the Christmas party on the 14th. Amber's invited him to a Christmas party. It's kind of a little bit more formal. This is the day they go together to get fitted for the tuxedo. They go to this birthday party. It's a very casual thing, just like a small house party. And there is one photo that came out of this that I had never seen before, but there is a photo of them at this party on the 11th. And then their fourth and final date comes on Saturday, December 14th. This is when Scott shows up in his tuxedo. He brings Amber 3 dozen roses, and they go to this Christmas party that's at this restaurant bar place. And so they go there, they have a great night. Now, the photos you've seen are not from there. One of her friends, a person named Saki, S-A-K-I, is with them, rides with them, and Saki's in the back seat of the car. So Saki is the one that takes that really infamous picture now where they're both looking back between the seats and smiling. Saki takes that picture. Then they go to this party at this restaurant. They come back to Saki's house and kind of have an after party. And that's when all those other photos are taken with Scott in the Santa hat and them standing by the tree and them doing all that. That's actually at Saki's house where those photos are taken. Now, this is, again, Scott stays the night at Amber's house. And this is interesting because this is what she testified to. In the morning, they have early morning sex. And this is the only time they've ever had unprotected sex. Every other time they used condoms. So this is the only time they'd had unprotected sex. Amber says in her testimony that then this brought up this conversation about kind of that, what if? Like, would you ever want children? What's your take on this? Amber testified that Scott said he would be perfectly happy not having any biological children, that he would love to raise Ayana as his own, but that it would be okay if he never had any biological children. It sounds like he's not on any sort of birth control, and there's even conversation about either her getting on birth control or Scott getting a vasectomy, like he volunteers to get a vasectomy. So this is their conversation that morning. Now, this is the morning of December 15th. And Scott makes it pretty clear to Amber at this point that this is going to be the last time they see each other because he's going to be traveling. He's going to be doing a lot of business. He's going to be a lot of places. He actually tells her it's likely they might not see each other again until the end of January. But this does end up being their very last date. So a total of 4 dates total between November 20th and December 14th. They went out really technically 4 times in that period of time based on on her testimony. They became incredibly close. They were talking about him meeting her parents. They were being happy to raise Ayana, him acting almost fatherly, feeding her, changing her bandage, carrying her, putting her car seat in his truck. He was doing things that gave Amber the impression that he would be a partner in the raising of Ayana because Ayana's dad isn't in the picture. Now, even though they weren't seeing each other between the 15th and the end of the month or the end of January, whenever they said they were going to see each other again, they do chat every once in a while. So there is record of them. They spoke on the 17th of December. They spoke on the 19th of December. They spoke on the 22nd, which is a day that Scott said he was leaving to go to Maine. They spoke on the 23rd, which is when Amber asked Scott for an address where she could send a Christmas present, and he gave her a P.O. box in Modesto, which made her a little bit suspicious. Also on the 23rd, during the P.O. box conversation, he asks her kind of like, what are your plans? She does mention that she has an appointment to go to the doctor to talk to the doctor about getting on birth control. And that's when Scott, according to Amber's testimony, that's when Scott says again, instead of you taking a pill every day, should I just get a vasectomy? They don't speak at all on the 24th. The morning of the 25th, they both kind of call each other. So Amber calls him, he returns her call. When he calls her, it's still pretty early in the day, and he tells her, I'll call you back later. And this is Christmas Day. So Amber is with Sean, and they're at Sean's uncle's house. And so as the day goes on, the uncle, starts to sense that Amber's a little bit upset that Scott's not calling. And he said he was going to call, and how do you not call? So at some point, he picks up Amber's phone and he calls Scott and leaves Scott a voicemail saying, how do you leave this lady waiting? Like, you should call her. So Scott calls Amber. He gets the message and he calls Amber. So on one occasion, it sounds like Sean kind of prodded him to call Amber, and now the uncle is kind of prodding Scott to call Amber because Scott's a slacker who doesn't seem to want to call people when he promises that he'll call them. Now, there are some numbers here that I'll finish with, and we're going to come back and get into some of these phone calls, but this is before really anything was being recorded. This was just taken from their phone bills. Between December 16th and December 23rd, which is about an 7-day period, there are 26 phone calls between the two of them. And remember, this is back when not everybody had a cell phone. You didn't always have your cell phone on you. So there's a lot of missed calls. So this isn't the number of time they talk. This is just the number of calls back and forth. There are 26 phone calls made between them in a 7-day period. Of those, 26 of them, 16 were Amber calling Scott, and Scott called her the other 10 times. And then between December 25th and December 29th, there was 40 calls in that 4-day period. Amber called Scott 29 times. Scott called her 11 times. On the stand, both attorneys asked Amber about her phone records on the 26th because she'd made multiple calls to Scott on the 26th. The prosecution attorney says, do you remember calling him on the 26th? Yes, I do. Did you call him maybe several times? Yes, I did. Less than 10? Yes, less than 10. But on cross-examination, we found out that it was actually 14 calls. So Amber called Scott 14 times on the 26th. Her testimony is that she just wanted to know if he got her Christmas present. But I think it's more than that, right? She's starting to get suspicious. There's too many red flags. She's also at this point talking to a friend of hers that I believe is a police officer. He has police contacts. And so she's starting to hear some things that are making her question, which I think is why she's like kind of calling repeatedly to try and get him on the phone. On the evening of the 29th, Amber is with Sean. They go to a party at Sean's aunt's house, I think it is. And during that party, pretty late, Amber gets a phone call from her friend. And he somewhat confirms it. He says, you need to stop what you're doing. You need to call the Modesto Police Department. And so Amber does. She immediately calls the tip line. Nobody from the tip line calls her back. So the very next morning, this is the morning of the 30th, she calls the tip line again. Then Brokini calls her back. And the rest is history. They take Amber on the 30th to Radio Shack to get a recording device, and she begins recording the conversations with Scott. I'm going to make another video where I talk about a lot of these calls, but there were over 300 of them that came up during that period of time that she was recording him. And it was about 50-50 of them each calling each other probably close to an equal amount of time. Stay tuned. There's more to come.